Hello again. This continuation video talks about three important chess concepts. These are: Number 1. Exchanging down to a win. You want to always have a good reason to make exchanges. One great reason to exchange pieces is when you're ahead in material. In that case, trades will simplify the game and make it easier for you to convert your advantage into a win. Number 2. Rule of the square. Save yourself a lot of worry and calculation by learning this one simple endgame rule. Number 3. Creating a passed pawn. Gain the winning advantage by creating a passed pawn. Often you can make trades or sacrifices to create the passed pawn. Always keep an eye out for these opportunities. These three important endgame concepts will be illustrated as follows.
When deciding to trade pieces, it's worth remembering the phrase, "To take is a mistake." Unless a trade improves your position or makes your opponent's position worse, you should think twice before automatically trading even pieces, such as a bishop for a bishop. There is a time when even trades are actually good, and that is when we are up material. If I have 5 apples and you have 3 apples, and we each remove 1 apple at a time, who's going to run out of apples first? The person with less apples, right? The same idea applies to chess. Even trades are no longer even if one side has more material. Let's look at some examples of trading pieces to win the game. In this position, white is up 2 pawns, but it will not be easy to win since white's king is exposed to checks from black's queen. If white could trade the queens, white's 2 connected passed pawns would easily win the game. Can you find a way to trade queens and enter a winning pawn ending? That's right, after queen a8, check. This forces black's king to move. After king f7, queen takes g8 check, king takes g8, white will easily win the game after a4. Black's king cannot stop the a-pawn from promoting into a queen. In this position, black is up a queen for a rook. Notice that black has 2 advanced pawns on the queen side, b4 and a4. White's rook on f3 is trying to slow these pawns down and prevent them from advancing. With black to move, can you find a way to force one of black's pawns through on the queen side? The easiest way is to remove white's main defender, the rook. After queen takes f3, black sacrifices a queen for the rook because now black's pawns on the queen side cannot be stopped. After g takes f3, a3, black will soon promote to a queen and should win the game easily. Let's take a look at one more example together. In this position, is any side ahead in material? That's right, black is up an entire rook and bishop. Notice though, white has a pawn on g6 and a queen on h3, causing trouble, threatening checkmate on the very next move. What if black could force the queens off the board and black would still be up a rook? Is a rook enough to win the endgame? Yes, being up an entire rook should be enough to win the game. Can you see how black can force the queens off the board and trade down into a winning endgame? That's right, queen f1 check. Black trades a queen and a bishop for white's queen. Black is willing to give up material to enter a completely winning endgame where white has no counterplay. After queen takes f1, bishop takes f1, king takes f1, black can easily win this endgame, beginning with the idea of removing white's advanced pawns with rook to d8. Now it's your turn to practice trading down to win. One of the trickiest endgames to play is when a passed pawn is being chased down by the opposing king. How do we know if the king will catch the passed pawn in time before it is able to reach the promotion square? We can count every single move by both sides to try and find the answer, but this takes time and we risk miscounting the moves. Fortunately, there is an easier way to find the answer with only a quick glance at the board with little to no calculation required. This method is known as the square of the pawn. Let's take a look at this position. White has a pawn on a4. Let's draw a diagonal from the a4 pawn and connect it up the board in the same direction as the enemy king, like this. a4 and e8 are 2 of the corners of the square. The other 2 corners are a8 and e4. Did you notice that we formed a square? If black's king can enter the square before the pawn moves, the king will catch the pawn before it promotes. In this position, with black to move, can black's king on f3 enter the square of the pawn and catch the passed pawn? Yes, it can, with king e4. Black's king is now in the square of the pawn. Let's watch the black king chase down white's passed pawn. After a5, king d5, a6, king c6, a7, king b7. Black's king catches the passed pawn just in time, securing the draw by entering the square of the pawn. Let's take a look at this position again, but this time with white to move. After a5, can the black king on f3 catch the pawn? No, because the square of the pawn is now on a5, d8, d5, and a8. After king e4, a6, white's pawn will safely promote before black's king can catch it, so white will win the game. Let's take a look at one more position together. There is one case when entering the square of the pawn does not work. It only happens when the pawn is on its original square and is able to move 2 squares on the first turn. In this example, the white pawn is on a2. So if we draw the square of the pawn, we bring the diagonal all the way up the board toward the enemy king and connect the corners. Notice after king g2, since white's pawn can move 2 squares on the first turn, a4 shrinks the square to the corners a4, e4, e8, and a8. Since black's king cannot enter this square, black's king will not be in time to catch the pawn. Let's practice using the square of the pawn method to see if the passed pawn or the king chasing it will win the race. Grandmaster Aaron Nimzovich said, "A passed pawn is a criminal that must be held under lock and key." Passed pawns are that dangerous. If they are not kept under watch, a passed pawn can easily ramp the board and promote. That's why creating a passed pawn in an endgame with few pieces remaining to stop it from promoting can win you lots of games. Let's take a look at some examples. In this position, white's pawns on a6 and b5 are advanced, but the black pawn on a7 blocks one of the pawns and is ready to capture the other pawn if it advances to b6. Since both kings are on the other side of the board, if white can force a passed pawn, the game will soon be over. White will promote to a queen and win the game. Can you see how white can force a passed pawn? That's right, b6, threatening to capture the pawn on a7. After a takes b6, the a file has been cleared for white's a pawn to promote. White plays a7 and will promote to a queen on the next move and win the endgame quickly. In this example, white's pawn on d6 is blocked by the d7 pawn. Can you find a way to turn this blocked pawn into a passed pawn? The sacrificial blow, rook takes e6. Capturing black's bishop either wins a piece and soon the game, or after d takes e6, the newly passed pawn moves to d7, promoting on the next move. Let's take a look at this position. White plays b4, and after a takes b4, white's newly created passed pawn advances with a5. Is black in trouble? Not if black's king can enter the square of the pawn formed by connecting the square the pawn is on, a5, with the other 3 corners, d8, d5, and a8. After king d5, the black king enters the square of the pawn before the pawn can move, so black's king will catch white's passed pawn. After a6, king c6. Notice if white plays a7, the black king will catch the passed pawn with king b7. So white should change plans and attack the b4 pawn before black's king can protect it. Now that you've learned the importance of passed pawns, it's your turn to practice forcing passed pawns.